What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about the length of the main story of Hogwarts Legacy. Now, I know I said Diagon Alley and Ollivanders, and I will get to that video, but something struck my brain, not like an actual object, but a few days ago, where I was sitting and I was playing video games, as I often do, and I was thinking, how long could this story of Hogwarts be? And I was thinking, well, let's think about some examples, okay? So I thought to The Witcher 3, and I said, well, how long is The Witcher 3's main story? And the answer is it's pretty long. But in terms of the full game, in terms of the full Witcher 3 experience, it's not, well, it's subjective, but it's not long, right? It's about, I would argue, like a third, maybe, of the base game. Now, my estimation, and I'm going to give more examples, but my estimation of The Witcher 3, let's just throw that out as an example, right, is if the main game takes you around 75 hours if you're doing kind of everything, if you're doing all the side missions, all of the optional activities you can do, okay, anything kind of mission related, let's even say, right? The game is probably like 70, 80 hours. Now, of course, that can go up, down, depending on how slow, or if you're doing photo mode and you're taking 500 pictures of these, these games that are coming out nowadays, right? So if you're doing that, sure, okay? The main story, I would argue, is probably only like 20 or so hours, okay? So it's about, roughly speaking, like a third, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, again, depending on situation, of the main game. Then I thought, all right, I had just beaten Ghostwire Tokyo. That's a game I've talked about quite a bit on the channel. I was given the review code, and the game is short. The game is short. It's short, I would say, even in terms of an open world game, okay? It took me around 17 and a half hours to do everything, almost everything, I guess. There's a couple very small things I haven't done, which would maybe get me like 20 hours, okay? So it took me 17 and a half hours to do pretty much everything in Ghostwire Tokyo. Now, how much of that was the main story? Around 5. Now, that's a very small amount of time, and I was thinking, all right, well, what would people do online, okay? What kind of horrible acts of violence would people do online if Hogwarts Legacy comes out and the main story is 5 hours? And I think the answer to that, the answer to that is they would do pretty terrible things. But the thing, I guess, that's the bigger thing around it, right, is, well, Ghostwire's short, but it's because the base game is short, right? Think about the example I just used with Witcher. And I have one final example, by the way. With The Witcher, I just said 20 to like 60, 70, 80 hours, right? So maybe a third, maybe a fourth. Ghostwire Tokyo, 5 hours for the main story, and then like 15 to 20 for everything, right? So you, again, get that same Now, I don't know if there's some mathematician. I don't know if there's some unspoken rule, or maybe it is a spoken rule in gaming development, where when you make an open world game, any kind of open world game, the main story, while being the most fundamentally important in terms of the storytelling, right, is actually by far not the main, like, it's not most of the game. Most of the game is filled up with other things, right? And I'm not arguing like it should change or anything. Like, that's the way that it is, and I actually think it's fine. I think that's the way that it's been for a long time, and there's really no reason to change it. Okay, so I'm not arguing for, like, to abolish it. I'm just saying this is kind of how it is. So let me say Tiny Tina, and then we'll go into Hogwarts. So Tiny Tina, my wife and I are currently playing, but I wanted to know as I was playing, well, how long is the game? And I looked up, estimations, 30, 35 hours, kind of. Now, the main missions of Tiny Tina are incredibly short. The side missions are much longer individually than, like, any of the main missions, at least so far, and I'm over halfway done, right? So it's like the main missions are, they're very cinematic, they're like cool things, there's more detail put into them than there is for the side stuff, but they're incredibly short, okay? And again, I would argue Tiny Tina, the main story, probably only takes 8 to 10 hours, whereas the base game, if you do everything, is probably 30 to 40. So again, you have that 1/3 or 1/4 ratio. So now moving into Hogwarts Legacy, how long should the game be? How long do people think it's going to be? Well, I've said for quite a while I would be perfectly fine if everything in Hogwarts Legacy took around 40 to 50 hours. That's kind of, now, and I've lowered it, I've raised it a little bit over time, but I would say definitively if every single thing in Hogwarts Legacy took, and maybe it's not completionist, so like if you get for like the platinum trophy or all the achievements on Xbox, right, maybe not 100%ing the game, but if you do pretty much everything. Maybe you missed some collectibles along the way, right? And that's kind of it. But you did every side mission, you did every event, you maxed out your, talking to friends, your like friendship meter, let's say. You went to all the classes, you leveled up, you max leveled, maybe not even max leveled, right? You could, that's like a give or take. You could do that or could not do that. So let's say all of that stuff, right? You did the main story, obviously the side mission stuff like that. The game's 50 hours long. Well, how long would the main story of the game be? Well, based off of past, and I know I only gave 3 examples, but that number is pretty good. Like that number, and think about it. Think about your favorite open world game. That's probably the number, right? So I would imagine then the main story would only be around 10 to 15 hours. So going in, and I don't think that's not a bad thing. I'm kind of just speculating, kind of just giving my opinion. I would imagine the main story of Hogwarts is only 10, 12, 14, 15, somewhere in that range of hours. I'd be shocked if it was 20. I'd be shocked even more if it was over 20. And I would be disappointed if it's like under 6 or 7, right? If the story is like 8 to 10 as the absolute low, I think I'd be okay with it. But if it's like a 5-hour story, then now again, it depends on the kind of game. Like Ghostwire Tokyo, I'm not mad the story was 5 hours because it's short, it gets to the point. There's really no, it doesn't overstay its welcome. You're in it and you're done, and that's it. And the base game is also not that big, so to have an open world game that only takes you like 17 hours to do everything, if the main story was 12, and then then you don't have any side things to, because then it's like, okay, well, let's give another 5. There's nothing to do then, right? And I guess vice versa, if the main story was 1 hour and the rest of the game was 16, that's also not okay, right? So there is kind of that sweet spot, and it goes up or down depending on how long your game is. Again, Tiny Tina is roughly double the size of Ghostwire, and the main story is also roughly double. You know what I mean? So it works. And so same thing with The Witcher, same thing for many games throughout history, right? So Hogwarts would kind of do the same thing. If the main game, the entire game, let's say, is 40 to 50 hours, I think the campaign would probably be around 10 to 15. I think that's kind of a sweet spot. You don't want to overstay your welcome. And also, again, when we're talking about not trying to radically change the rules here, I don't want this game to do something not even necessarily I don't want it to. It's just if the game is 50 hours to do everything, there is 0% chance. Bet me whatever you want. Okay, I'll give you anything in terms of my bet. There's no way the story is like 30, 35 hours. It literally is impossible. There's absolutely no way. If the game's 50, if everything in the game is 50 hours, there's no way the story is 30, 35, 40 hours, right? Most of the stuff in the game is that amount of time. The rest, the main story, is actually the smaller percentage, and that's fine. That's fine. So this is not really like bracing people. Number 1, the game doesn't come out for months. Number 2, it's just an opinion. Number 3, it's kind of the way all games are, so it's not like a shocker, although it could be, because I do see people come out there, not even necessarily just with Hogwarts, but I do see people like throwing around, oh, I wish the game is this long or that long, and that's fine. Like that's your right to be excited. That's your right to like have an expectation. Like that's all you. But just in case people maybe were unaware, I kind of wanted to make this video. So there's nothing wrong with it, but that's an early kind of estimation, and that's assuming the game's 40, 50 hours. And that's just sticking with what I've always thought. If the game's like 70, if we're talking about like a Witcher 3, which again, Witcher 3 is a huge game. It's so big, and that's not even, I'm not counting the DLCs for The Witcher 3. I'm counting the base game. The Witcher 3 is a gigantic game that's massive, that if you do everything, there's a lot there. And the main story of The Witcher 3 is also quite long, because the game itself is big. So you need, and you have to think about it that way too, right? Because like the main story is kind of that device that gets you everywhere. I mean, even like think about Horizon. If anybody's played Horizon Forbidden West, Horizon is a game that most of the stuff that makes that game last long is the side stuff. It's not the main stuff. There's like 13 quests in the entire game, maybe 15. I know Tiny Tina is like 11 missions. That's how many missions are in Tiny Tina, right? There's not a lot. There's normally, I don't want to give a definitive, because that is I think it depends on the game, but there could only be like 10 main missions for Hogwarts Legacy. But those 10 missions could be very long. Those 10 missions could take you to Gringotts. It could take you to Diagon Alley. It could take you to exploring all of Hogwarts Castle. And then What you do after that is up for this, like, that's the side missions jobs. That's the recruiting friends jobs. That's the going to classes jobs. Those things populate the world. The main mission is to tell you the main mission. It's to, you know, show you the characters. It's to get you the plot. It's to get you to different locations. It's to introduce features to you. Okay, here's how spells work. Here's how you unlock spells. And then it gets lost. You know what I mean? Then it leaves and you do everything else, right? That's how it is. So, and again, I'm not like, this isn't meant to be like a lecture. This isn't meant to be like a talking down thing. I thought this would be a pretty fun video, and I personally enjoyed recording it. Hopefully you guys liked it. Let me know in the comments below. Make sure, as always, you're all subscribed to the channel. Hit the bell icon so you guys know when all these videos go up. If you want to follow me anywhere else, as always, all my social media is in the description below. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you all on the next video.